Imagine this. It's a quiet, seemingly normal day in the middle of summer, and two twin brothers, full of life, laughter, and the bond of shared memories, decide to go on a fishing trip. It's supposed to be like any other weekend. Just the two of them, their boat, and the river. But what happens next changes everything. Hours pass, and the family begins to wonder where the boys are. Days go by with no sign of them. The police search for months, scouring the woods and the riverbanks, but the case grows colder with every passing year. The twins, together, inseparable, are gone. Just like that. Vanished without a trace. And then, decades later, a stunning revelation. The river, usually full and unpredictable, begins to dry up. What's left behind? Their boat, perfectly preserved, nestled against the rocks. But where are they? What happened? The answer lies somewhere in the depths of this mystery, and I promise, by the time we reach the end of this video, you'll have chills from the truth. So stick around, because this isn't just about a missing persons case. This is about unraveling a mystery that's been buried under years of unanswered questions, and you're going to want to know what happened. What would you do if your loved ones disappeared, only to have their story stay untold for over 3 decades? How would you feel, knowing that the answers could be hidden beneath a riverbed, waiting to be uncovered by something as simple as a drought? And yet, as mysterious as this may seem, it's only the beginning. The discovery of the boat isn't the end of this tale. It's the moment everything changes, the point where everything you think you know begins to shift. But hold on, because the answers will take you on a journey that's filled with twists and turns you won't see coming. Before we dive into what was found, and what still remains unsolved, let's take a moment to think about the brothers themselves. The twins, living in a small town surrounded by nature and adventure. Growing up, they were the kind of duo you could never separate. Always together, always laughing, always planning their next adventure. To the outside world, they were a symbol of closeness, two halves of the same whole. To their family, they were a promise, twin brothers destined to live a life full of shared memories. But when they set out that day, with no indication of the horrors to come, they could never have known it would be their last. And yet, somehow, after all these years, their story isn't over. Not by a long shot. I want you to take a moment to think about your own family, your siblings, your closest friends. Now, picture them walking out the door one day, heading off for something as simple as a fishing trip, and then never coming back. The loss would be unbearable. The grief, the confusion, it would consume you. But what if, years later, an unexpected twist appeared? A new lead, a new clue that reignites the hope you thought was long lost? That's exactly what happened here. But it wasn't just a lead. It was a discovery that forced everyone to ask the unthinkable. Did the brothers really vanish? Or was something more sinister at play? Let's step back into the scene, to the summer of the twins' disappearance. The river was calm that day, a perfect setting for fishing. No one expected anything out of the ordinary. But when the boys didn't return, it was the first sign that something was wrong. Their boat, once a symbol of carefree adventure, was nowhere to be found. Their family waited, they hoped, but the search turned up nothing. The river, expansive and winding, held its secrets tight. It was as though the river itself had swallowed them whole, refusing to give up its deadliest of mysteries. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And just when the case seemed like it would fade into a forgotten memory, the drought hit. A river that was once filled with life, now eerily empty. The water receded, revealing something that no one could have predicted. The boat was there, wedged between the rocks, untouched by time. A haunting reminder of the day the twins disappeared. But how? Why was it preserved so perfectly? Why, after all this time, did this piece of evidence emerge from the depths? Was it just a fluke of nature? Or did it reveal something much more unsettling? There's no denying it. This discovery changes everything. The question is, does it bring us closer to the truth? Or does it simply open a door to even darker questions? I know you're sitting there wondering, what does this all mean? I get it. This story has you on the edge of your seat, doesn't it? The boat was the first clue, but trust me when I tell you, it's not the only one. In fact, there's so much more to this story than just the boat. As we dig deeper into the mystery of the twin brothers, the question remains, how far are you willing to go to uncover the truth? What if what you thought was a simple fishing trip was actually something much bigger, something that no one ever saw coming? I promise you that as we move through this story, you're going to want to stay with me until the very end. You're going to need to hear everything, the shocking twists, the hidden details, and the truth that's been locked away for 30 years. It's all here, and it's waiting for you to discover it. But here's the thing. This is just the beginning. The river's drought may have uncovered their boat, but it didn't uncover the full truth. The deeper we go, the more questions pile up. What could have happened to the twins? Was it an accident, or something more deliberate? Could the river itself hold the key to their disappearance? And what does this discovery say about the way we view the world around us? Because, as you'll soon find out, the answer to the mystery isn't what you think. As we peel back the layers of this mystery, let's take a closer look at the events leading up to the day the twin brothers vanished. Growing up in the small, tight-knit town of Clearwater, their lives were anything but ordinary. Everyone knew them, and everyone knew that the bond between the two of them was unshakable. They had a way of finishing each other's sentences, always knowing what the other was thinking. In fact, they were practically inseparable. But despite their seemingly perfect relationship, there were subtle signs that not everything in their lives was as serene as it appeared on the surface. Lately, the twins had been behaving a little differently. It wasn't obvious at first. They still made their daily trips to the local diner, still went to their favorite fishing spot by the river, and still joked around with the few friends they had in town. But those closest to them noticed the quiet changes. One of the twins, Lucas, had been acting strange in the months leading up to their disappearance. He'd been increasingly distant, often lost in thought, as though there was something weighing heavily on his mind. It wasn't anything overt, but people who knew him well could tell that something wasn't quite right. He'd even started to pull away from his brother, Max, for the first time in their lives. Max, on the other hand, appeared more eager than ever to hold onto the bond they'd always shared. Was this tension between them a natural shift? Or was there something more going on beneath the surface? Something that Max wasn't seeing, or perhaps wasn't willing to acknowledge. It wasn't long before rumors started swirling around town. There was talk of a local businessman, a man named Raymond Hawk, who had been seen around the twins more often than usual in the weeks before their trip. Hawk was a wealthy, influential figure in Clearwater, someone who had his fingers in a lot of different pies. On the surface, he seemed harmless enough, but there was always an air of mystery surrounding him. Some said he was trying to buy up land near the river, but no one knew for sure. Others whispered that he had some kind of shady dealings going on, especially with the town's dwindling natural resources. Could Raymond Hawk have had something to do with the brothers' disappearance? Was he somehow involved in their fishing trip that day, or did he have a more sinister role to play? But even as suspicions about Hawk grew, another lead emerged. A few weeks before they vanished, the twins had gotten into a heated argument with their father, Daniel. The two men had always been close, but there had been a noticeable rift between them recently. Daniel had been pressuring the twins to help him with a project, something involving the family's land along the river, but the boys had refused. This wasn't the first time they'd butted heads with their father, but this argument felt different. It was more than just a typical father-son disagreement. It felt like something deeper, something unresolved. Some said Daniel had been pushing them too hard, while others suggested that the boys might have been trying to get away from him altogether. Was there tension in the family that had been building for years, and was this the breaking point? Or was there something darker lurking behind their reluctance to help their father? The mystery of their disappearance deepened when another odd piece of information came to light. On the morning they went missing, there had been a strange phone call made from their home. The call had been traced to a payphone on the outskirts of town, just a few miles from the river. No one knew who made the call or what it was about, but the timing was unsettling. Why would the twins make a call from a payphone when they had perfectly good cell phones? Was it someone who didn't want them to be tracked? Was it someone they knew, or was it a complete stranger? As the weeks and months passed without a single clue, The search for the twins grew colder. The authorities had no new leads to follow, and the case slowly faded from the headlines. The river became a symbol of the mystery, wide, murky, and full of secrets. But the drought that hit 30 years later would change everything. When the river receded, exposing the boat, it sparked new hope that the case might finally be solved. However, there was one thing that kept bothering the investigators. The boat wasn't just lying there in the shallow water. It was positioned in a way that didn't make sense. It was as if it had been carefully placed there, hidden for years, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Was the boat a clue, or was it part of a larger, more complex cover-up? As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that everyone involved had secrets. Raymond Hawk's involvement, though never proven, remained a chilling possibility. The rumors about him, the strange nature of the twins' last interactions with him, it all pointed to something more than just a tragic accident. And then there was Daniel, the father, whose strange behavior during the years following the disappearance raised suspicions of his own. Had he been hiding something? Had he known more than he let on? What was the truth behind this strained relationship with his sons? And what about the payphone call? Who was behind it, and why was it so important? The twists kept coming, but none of them offered clear answers. The boat, so perfectly preserved, remained the key mystery. Why had it been left behind? Where were the boys? Why, after all these years, did the drought expose it? The deeper the investigation went, the more layers were peeled away. But with each new discovery came more questions. Was this a tragic accident? A family's secret gone horribly wrong? Or was there something else hiding in the shadows, something much darker than anyone could have imagined? And then, just as the case seemed to be fading into the past once again, a shocking new clue emerged. One that no one expected, one that would change everything, and send the investigation down a path no one could have foreseen. But that's a story for another time. As the investigation continued to unfold, the tension around Clearwater grew palpable. The boat, still nestled in the riverbed, became more than just an object of curiosity. It became a symbol of the answers that seemed forever out of reach. With each new lead, the possibility of uncovering the truth grew closer, yet so did the obstacles that seemed to be standing in the way of justice. The more the authorities tried to dig, the more the mysteries surrounding the twins' disappearance seemed to deepen. One of the most shocking setbacks came when the police uncovered something disturbing, an old journal belonging to Max. It was found in a box at the back of a storage unit they had rented shortly before the twins disappeared. For a brief moment, it looked like they were finally going to find a clue that could point them in the right direction. Max had written down his thoughts on everything, on their fishing trips, on his relationship with his father, even on their sudden distance from Raymond Hawk. The journal was a treasure trove of information, a key that could unlock everything. Or so it seemed. The moment the police started to analyze the pages, the journal mysteriously disappeared from the evidence locker. No one knew how it vanished. There were no signs of forced entry, no explanation for its disappearance. It was simply gone, as if the journal had never existed at all. The investigators were left scrambling, unable to explain how such an important piece of evidence could vanish right under their noses. Was this a coincidence, or was someone actively working to keep the truth hidden? The disappearance of the journal wasn't the only strange occurrence. As the investigation gained momentum, certain individuals began to take notice of what was happening, and not all of them were pleased. Just days after the journal vanished, Daniel, the twins' father, made an unexpected appearance at the sheriff's office. He wasn't there to offer new information. Instead, he came with a chilling warning for the lead investigator. Daniel was adamant that they stop digging into the past, that they leave the case alone and move on with their lives. His exact words were, "Some things are better left buried." The sheriff couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel wasn't just a grieving father. There was something in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. Was he afraid of what might come to light? Was he protecting someone or something? The more the investigation pushed forward, the more his cryptic warning felt like an attempt to silence the truth. But what could he be hiding? Why was he so desperate to stop them from learning the real story? Just when it seemed like the pieces of the puzzle might start to fall into place, a new player entered the scene. Her name was Eliza Hawke, the daughter of Raymond Hawke, the wealthy businessman whose name had surfaced as a potential connection to the twins' disappearance. Eliza had always been somewhat of an enigma, someone who kept to herself, rarely seen in town, and even more rarely heard from. But when she suddenly reached out to the investigators, claiming to have new information, it sent shockwaves through the entire case. She said she had been keeping a secret for years, something that could change everything they thought they knew. Of course, the sheriff was hesitant. There was something too convenient about her offer. Eliza was a part of the Hawke family, a family with connections to the land, to the river, and potentially to the twins' disappearance. Could she be trusted? Or was she trying to manipulate the situation for her own gain? Eliza's involvement in the case wasn't the only complication that arose. With each passing day, more people seemed to be coming forward, offering pieces of the puzzle that didn't always fit together. Some were helpful, providing information that seemed promising, while others had motives that remained unclear. A local fisherman, who had been one of the first to report seeing the twins on the day they went missing, suddenly changed his story, claiming he had never seen them at all. He didn't offer an explanation for the change, leaving the investigators with more questions than answers. Was he lying? Had someone forced him to recant his statement? Or was he simply scared to get involved? But perhaps the most unsettling development came when the sheriff received a strange, anonymous letter. The letter was typed, not handwritten, and it contained only one sentence: "The river keeps its secrets well." The letter didn't provide any details or clues, but it was clear that someone was watching, and someone was trying to keep the investigation from going any further. Was it a warning? A threat? Or was it a message from someone who knew exactly what had happened to the twins and didn't want the truth to come out? Whoever sent it clearly wanted to make sure the mystery remained unsolved, to ensure that the river's secrets stayed hidden forever. All of this, the journal disappearing, Daniel's cryptic warning, Eliza's sudden involvement, the changing testimonies, and the anonymous letter, only added to the growing sense of unease. It was as if the closer the investigators got to the truth, the more forces beyond their control pushed back against them. The river, which had already taken so much from the town, seemed to be holding on to its darkest secrets with a vengeance. And yet, despite all the obstacles, there was one thing that couldn't be ignored: the boat. It was still there, still waiting to tell its story. Every time someone tried to get closer to the truth, the boat seemed to mock them, like a reminder that the answers were within reach, but always just out of grasp. As the investigation continued, the town of Clearwater was left to wonder who could be trusted, who was hiding something, and whether the truth would ever come to light. Every new piece of evidence only led to more questions. And as the pieces started to shift, something became painfully clear. Someone didn't want the truth to be uncovered. But who?
And why?
What had really happened to the twin brothers on that fateful day? With so many twists and turns, so many hidden motives, it felt like the case was teetering on the edge of a breakthrough. But just as the sheriff was about to pursue a promising new lead, something unexpected happened. A final, shocking turn that left everyone questioning everything they thought they knew. And it was at that moment, when the investigation seemed to be on the verge of a breakthrough, that the most important clue of all disappeared without a trace. Just when it seemed like the investigation was about to unravel the truth, a new twist emerged, threatening to pull the entire case into a darker, more dangerous realm. Sheriff Clark had been diligently following up on the last few threads when something unusual happened, something that made him question everything, including the motives of those he thought he could trust. It started with a phone call, one that was meant to be routine, but instead opened a new chapter in the mystery. The call came from a quiet town a few hours away, from a man named Curtis, who had once been a close friend of Max and Liam, the twin brothers who vanished so many years ago. Curtis had been one of the few who knew the boys well, growing up with them and spending countless hours fishing, camping, and talking about their futures. But it was the tone in his voice that immediately unsettled the sheriff. There was fear, but also something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Curtis had always been a straight shooter, but now, He sounded like he was trying to get something off his chest, as if he had been carrying a heavy burden for years. Curtis hesitated before saying anything substantial, almost as if weighing his words carefully. "Sheriff, I don't know if you've seen this, but I think I need to tell you about a letter I got a couple of days ago," he began. "It was a strange one, and at first, I thought it was just some crazy coincidence, but after hearing about the investigation, I don't think it's a coincidence at all." The letter said the same thing. "The river keeps its secrets well." Clark's stomach dropped. The same message, the same cryptic warning, the same ominous phrase that had been left on his desk just days before, now showing up in a completely different part of the story. Could Curtis be the next person being targeted? Or was he somehow involved in what happened all those years ago? The fact that he was even coming forward was a sign that something was off, that the pressure was mounting. Curtis continued, his voice shaky. "I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. A few weeks before the twins disappeared, Max started acting strange. He was pulling away from everyone, getting into arguments with his dad, talking about getting out of town. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, I wonder if he knew something was coming. I wonder if he was trying to leave before something happened." Curtis's voice trailed off, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But as soon as the sheriff pressed him for more details, Curtis abruptly cut the conversation short. "I've said enough. Just be careful, Sheriff. There's a lot more going on than you think." The line went dead. No more information. No more clarity. Just silence. What Curtis had said unsettled the sheriff, not only because of the mysterious letter, but also because of the suggestion that Max had known something that could have led to their disappearance. The implications were far-reaching, and the uncertainty of what it all meant left Clark with more questions than answers. If the twins had been running from something, then who or what were they running from? And why hadn't anyone known about it until now? The pieces of the puzzle were multiplying, but nothing seemed to fit together. As the sheriff continued to process this new information, a new revelation came from an unlikely source, Eliza Hawke, Raymond Hawke's daughter, who had reappeared in the investigation after her earlier cryptic involvement. Eliza had contacted Clark, requesting a meeting in person. She was insistent, almost desperate. At first, the sheriff had been skeptical of her motives, but now, he couldn't ignore the sense that she was trying to tell him something important. When they met, Eliza looked tired, her eyes shadowed with a look of someone who had carried a heavy burden for far too long. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid that someone might be listening. "My father wasn't just some businessman in this town," she began. "He was part of something bigger. A lot bigger. And if you're digging into the twins' disappearance, you're going to uncover something that no one wants you to find. My father, he was involved in things that could ruin this town." At first, Clark thought Eliza was just a victim of her father's shadow, a girl caught up in the secrets and lies of a powerful family. But as she spoke, there was a new edge to her words. Eliza wasn't just revealing family secrets, she was hinting at something that connected her father to the missing twins. Her father's business dealings, she claimed, had involved people who didn't take kindly to loose ends being tied up. If Raymond had been tied to the twins in some way, if there had been something his business was hiding, the sheriff knew that uncovering that truth would put him and anyone involved in grave danger. But just as Eliza began to explain more, she suddenly stopped herself, her eyes darting nervously to the door. The sheriff was about to press her for more when she stood up abruptly, her face pale. "You need to stop. Right now," she warned, her voice rising in panic. "You don't understand what you're getting into. Just drop it before it's too late." She rushed out of the room, leaving Clark in a daze. The words she had said, the cryptic warnings, the mention of things bigger than anyone had realized, were too much to ignore. Was she trying to protect her father? Or was she trying to protect herself? And who was she really working for? By the time the sheriff made his way back to the investigation, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if the investigation wasn't just about finding the twins anymore? What if the real story was about something much darker, something tied to the very fabric of Clearwater itself? As he mulled over everything, Curtis's strange phone call, Eliza's warning, the cryptic letter, and the mysterious events surrounding the missing journal, It became clear that the town had been hiding secrets for decades. The river had been the keeper of those secrets, but now, those secrets were starting to break free. The boat, still sitting in the riverbed, was only the beginning. What lay ahead was something far more dangerous, something that threatened to unravel everything. And as the sheriff began to piece together the tangled web of lies, deceit, and hidden motives, the stakes became even higher. No one was safe anymore. Not the investigators, not the people in town, not even the twins who had disappeared without a trace all those years ago. Someone, somewhere, was watching, and it seemed like they would stop at nothing to make sure the truth never came out. The investigation was about to take a turn that no one could predict. The air had turned thick with tension in Clearwater. Sheriff Clark couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on him. Every corner of the town seemed to pulse with a hidden energy, one that he couldn't quite understand but felt all around him. It was as though everyone had a secret, and that secret was about to come to light, whether they were ready for it or not. The investigation, which had started with a seemingly straightforward missing persons case, had spiraled into something far darker, something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. And now, as he sat at his desk, staring at the map of the river and the scattered pieces of evidence before him, he could feel it. He was being watched. It started with a series of small, unsettling events that had seemed insignificant at first. A car that appeared to be following him as he drove home late one evening. A shadow lingering in the corner of his office when he'd come in early to review his notes. A faint rustling outside his window when he'd stepped away to grab a cup of coffee. Each time, his heart would race for a split second, but he'd dismiss it as his mind playing tricks on him, until the night it all changed. It was a Thursday, just days after Eliza Hawke's warning, and Sheriff Clark had spent the evening at a local diner, trying to unwind from the weight of the investigation. He sat alone at the counter, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, his mind replaying every conversation, every clue, trying to make sense of it all. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The suspicion that he was being followed, that someone was tracking his every move, lingered like a dark cloud. He had just gotten up to leave when he noticed a man sitting at the booth near the window, his face partially obscured by a newspaper. At first, Clark thought nothing of it, until the man lowered the paper just enough to reveal his eyes, which locked onto the sheriff's with a cold, calculating gaze. A chill ran down Clark's spine, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. There was something in that look, something that made his skin crawl. It wasn't just a stare, it was a message. A silent warning. Clark's instincts screamed at him to leave, but as he turned to walk out of the diner, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The man hadn't followed him, but Clark knew that he would. The following day, the town's morning calm was shattered when Clark received an unexpected phone call, a call that would send the investigation spiraling into even darker territory. His deputy, Jameson, was on the line, his voice trembling with urgency. "Sheriff, you need to get down here. It's Carla, she's gone." The words hit Clark like a punch to the gut. Carla, his longtime assistant and one of the few people he trusted, had disappeared without a trace. No sign of a struggle, no indication that she had left willingly. She had just vanished, like so many others in Clearwater's past. The implications were clear. Carla's disappearance wasn't just a random act. It was tied to the case, to the secrets that were slowly unraveling around them. The sheriff's pulse quickened as he raced to the office, his mind already reeling. Had she discovered something? Had she gotten too close to the truth? And if so, who would want to silence her? The thought of her being in danger, of someone using her as leverage against him, filled him with a deep sense of helplessness. It wasn't just an investigation anymore. This was personal. When he arrived at the office, the scene was nothing short of chaotic. The building had been ransacked. Her desk drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor, and the computer was smashed. Whoever had taken Carla had done it with a clear purpose: to destroy any trace of her involvement, to wipe away any evidence she might have uncovered. Clark's stomach twisted. What was it she had been working on before she disappeared? Was it something that could destroy the very people he'd been chasing for answers? As he sifted through the wreckage of her desk, a single, cryptic note caught his eye. It was handwritten, hastily scribbled on a piece of torn paper, and it simply read, "They know you're close. Stop now or else." His heart pounded in his chest as he folded the paper, trying to maintain his composure. But inside, something was shifting. This was no longer just about finding the twins. This was about survival, his own survival. They were no longer dealing with a case, a mystery, or even a cold trail. Someone was hunting them, and they knew exactly how to get to him. He was no longer in control of this investigation. It was no longer his to solve. Someone else was pulling the strings, and they were willing to do anything to keep the truth buried. He couldn't shake the feeling that the web of lies surrounding him was tightening, that everyone he had trusted up until this point had been hiding something. And just as his mind began to spiral into a maze of paranoia and fear, another thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. The man at the diner. Was he involved? Had he been watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike? And if the man had been following him, who else was? The world outside seemed to blur as Clark realized that the danger wasn't just lurking in the shadows. It was in the people around him, the ones who had the most to lose. People like Eliza Hawke, who had warned him away from the truth. People like Curtis, who had spoken in riddles but offered no real answers. And now Carla, who had vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving only a message and a trail of destruction behind her. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to lead to another, but none of the pieces fit together, leaving Clark trapped in a game he didn't understand. As the sheriff stood in the empty office, his mind raced with thoughts of his next move. Should he continue down this dark path, knowing it could cost him everything? Should he turn back and walk away before it was too late? But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the town fell into a quiet darkness, one thing became painfully clear. There was no turning back. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. And the closer he got to the truth, the more people, innocent and guilty alike, would fall. The question that hung in the air, unanswered and unsettling, was no longer about the twins. It was about what, or who, was waiting for him in the shadows, and what he would do when the truth finally came to light. As Sheriff Clark sat in his dimly lit office, his fingers absently tracing the edges of Carla's note, a nagging feeling continued to eat away at him. The walls around him seemed to close in, the oppressive silence in the room only amplifying his anxiety. He had spent hours trying to make sense of the latest developments, the clues, the threats, Carla's disappearance, but nothing was adding up. Each piece of the puzzle, once a piece of hope, now seemed to contradict the last. The deeper he dug, the more confusing everything became. He had trusted people who had either disappeared or vanished without a trace, and his instinct screamed that someone was playing a dangerous game. As the hours ticked by, Clark felt the weight of the investigation press down on him like a physical force. Just when he thought he couldn't take another step forward, an unexpected phone call broke through the haze. It was Eliza Hawke, the one person who had warned him from the start to back off. She had been his reluctant ally, always cryptic, never fully revealing her own part in the story. She had been a source of uncertainty, but Clark had trusted her until now. Her voice was sharp, laced with an urgency that left no room for questions. "Sheriff, you need to meet me.
Now."
It's about the river, the twins, it's all been a lie." The words hit Clark like a punch to the gut. His mind raced as he processed the meaning behind her cryptic statement.
A lie?
What could she mean by that? Had everything he'd been working for, everything he thought he knew, been a fabrication? He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, his mind racing with 1,000 questions, and drove to the location she'd specified, the abandoned cabin on the outskirts of town. When Clark arrived, the dim lights of the cabin barely pierced the dense fog surrounding it. Eliza stood by the window, her back to him, staring out into the nothingness as though she could sense something lurking just out of sight. The air was heavy with tension as she turned to face him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't expected to see, guilt, fear, and something deeper, something darker. "You were right to follow the river," Eliza began, her voice low, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "But what you don't know is that it wasn't just the twins who disappeared that day. There was someone else, someone much closer to you." Clark's stomach dropped.
What was she talking about?
Who else could have disappeared? His mind reeled, his thoughts a whirl of confusion. But Eliza's next words stopped him cold. It was your brother, Sheriff. Your own brother was there, that day on the boat. The ground seemed to fall out from under him as the revelation hit with full force. His brother? Clark had always believed his sibling had died in a car accident years ago, an accident that had left a deep scar in his past. He had never questioned the story, never believed there was any other explanation for it. But now, with Eliza standing before him, her face pale and serious, that simple truth was crumbling away. How do you know this? Clark's voice barely escaped, thick with disbelief. Eliza shook her head, her expression unreadable. I didn't know until recently, she said, her voice trembling with something between regret and resolve. But your brother wasn't just another casualty of a tragic accident. He was part of the river's secret, a secret that's been hidden for years. The twins didn't vanish by accident. They were part of a bigger plan, and your brother was at the heart of it. Clark felt the room spin around him as Eliza's words sank in. He had always assumed that his brother's death was a chapter closed, a painful memory that he had never wanted to revisit. But now, everything he thought he knew was being ripped apart. His mind flashed back to the investigation. The pieces of the puzzle that hadn't fit, the inconsistencies in the stories, the whispers of a secret that no one would talk about. His brother's name, long buried in the past, suddenly resurfaced with a chilling clarity. I tried to warn you, Eliza continued, her voice breaking as she stepped closer. I didn't want to drag you into this, but you're too close now. Your brother's death, it wasn't an accident, Sheriff. It was a setup. The people who were behind it have been pulling the strings for years, and they won't stop until they finish what they started. Clark's mind raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of this new, horrifying truth. His brother, alive, involved in a conspiracy that tied back to the twins, to the river, to the very secrets that had been buried in clear water for decades. And yet, despite the weight of it all, something inside him resisted the reality of Eliza's words. He had trusted her, had believed she was on his side, but now, he couldn't help but wonder if she had known more than she was letting on. Was this all a game? Had she manipulated him, fed him just enough truth to keep him hooked, only to drag him deeper into the mess? Before Clark could respond, a loud knock echoed from the front door, sharp and urgent. His heart leapt into his throat, and before he could move, the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was someone he never expected to see again, his old partner, Deputy Jameson. But the look in his eyes wasn't one of familiarity. There was something colder, something more distant in his gaze. Sheriff, Jameson said, his voice flat and emotionless. It's time to end this. Too many people have been hurt. You need to stop digging, or there'll be consequences. I'm telling you this as a friend. Clark's world tilted as he looked at Jameson, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this the man he had trusted for years? Was he the one who had been pulling the strings all along? The sudden twist in the story, Eliza's cryptic warning, the discovery of his brother's true involvement, and now Jameson's chilling threat, left him reeling. Jameson, you don't understand. I have to finish this, Clark replied, his voice a mixture of defiance and confusion. But as he spoke, he couldn't shake the growing sense that he was no longer in control of the investigation. Something had shifted. He was no longer the one uncovering secrets. He was the one being played. The room seemed to close in on him, the weight of the truth threatening to crush him under its unbearable pressure. His brother, Carla, Eliza, Jameson, everything he thought he knew had just unraveled in front of him. And in that moment, Clark realized with a sinking feeling that the real mystery wasn't about the twins anymore. It was about who had orchestrated this twisted game and why they had chosen him to play their part. Everything was now in question, and the answers he sought might cost him far more than he was willing to lose. The following days felt like a blur for Sheriff Clark. Each passing moment was filled with the deafening echo of the ultimatum he had been given. The stakes had never been higher. Eliza's cryptic warnings, Jameson's chilling threat, and the shocking revelation about his brother had all collided, leaving him in a whirlwind of confusion and dread. His entire world had shifted, and now, with each new discovery, the path ahead seemed darker, more perilous than ever before. The weight of his responsibility, his duty to uncover the truth, felt heavier than a mountain pressing down on his chest. Clark had always prided himself on his ability to think clearly under pressure, but now, nothing seemed to make sense. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around him was either lying or withholding critical pieces of information. His trusted allies had become suspects, and every conversation seemed like another game of manipulation. But what made this even worse was that, at the heart of it all, he was still searching for his brother. And that truth, no matter how much it tore him apart, was one he couldn't ignore. The problem was, every choice seemed to lead to an impossible outcome. He had already seen too much to walk away, yet the further he dug, the more dangerous it became. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from people warning him to stop, unnamed voices with unclear intentions. One of them, a familiar number, was from Jameson. It was simple: stop or I'll make you. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. His old partner had crossed the line, and now Clark had to face the hard truth. Jameson had played a bigger role in this than he was willing to admit. But there was more. That same night, just hours after receiving Jameson's message, Carla's father, Thomas, contacted him. Their meeting was scheduled at the diner, the same one where Clark had met with Eliza. But this time, it wasn't a conversation Clark was prepared for. Thomas, a man whose life had been shattered by the loss of his daughter, sat across from him, his face ashen and drawn. There was a kind of quiet desperation in his eyes that unnerved Clark. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, handing it to Clark without a word. It was a photo of the twins, looking young and full of life, alongside a man Clark had never seen before.
Who's this?
Clark asked, his voice shaking slightly. The man in the photo had dark eyes that seemed to watch him from the image, but the name meant nothing to him. "That's my brother, Mark," Thomas replied, his voice tight. He was part of the same group that went on that fishing trip. He was the one who started all of this. He's the reason your brother got involved. He's the reason everything fell apart. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. The twins were involved in something bigger, something that Clark had only glimpsed at before. But why hadn't anyone mentioned Mark before? Why was Thomas revealing this now? And more importantly, why did it feel like everyone was hiding something crucial from him? Clark didn't know if he could trust Thomas, but he also didn't know where else to turn. As the weight of this new information settled in, Clark realized he was standing on the edge of something far darker than he had ever imagined. The investigation had stopped being about finding his brother and had become something else entirely. Now it was about choosing between the truth and his own survival. Because, as the walls seemed to close in on him, Clark knew that the people around him, people he had trusted, were just as dangerous as the ones he was chasing. The very next day, Sheriff Clark was forced to make a decision that would change everything. After weeks of being followed, threats made against him, and his personal life crumbling apart, Eliza called him again. This time, the urgency in her voice was palpable. She told him to meet her by the riverbank at dawn. There was something she needed to show him, something that would bring it all to an end. Clark knew better than to go alone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was it, that this was the moment he would finally uncover the truth. So, against his better judgment, he went. Arriving just as the sun began to rise, Clark found Eliza standing at the edge of the river, staring into the murky waters. Her face was pale, drawn tight with fear. She didn't say a word at first, just nodded toward the water, as if urging him to look. What Clark saw made his blood run cold. There, half submerged in the river, was a boat, its once pristine hull now covered in layers of mud, algae, and decay. But it wasn't just any boat. It was the boat, the one the twins had been on the day they vanished. The boat had been missing for 30 years, presumed lost to the river after the tragic event. Yet here it was, rising to the surface, as the drought had drained the water levels. The boat itself, a relic of the past, seemed to hold the answers Clark had been searching for all along. But as he stepped closer to the boat, he realized there was something else. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking slowly toward him. It was Jameson. "You shouldn't be here," Jameson said quietly, his tone cold and detached. "I told you to stop digging."
Why?
"What is this all about, Jameson?" Clark demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. "This is bigger than just some missing person case. It's about my brother. It's about Carla. About everything." Jameson's face remained emotionless as he pulled something from his coat, a small metal box. He handed it to Clark, who opened it slowly, only to find a stack of photographs inside, each one depicting scenes from the past. The twins, his brother, and others Clark didn't recognize, all gathered together, all wearing strange expressions. Some were laughing, others were serious, but they all shared one thing in common, a look of dread in their eyes, as if they knew something had gone terribly wrong. One of the photos showed his brother standing at the edge of the boat, smiling, but the shadows around him made it look like something was lurking beneath. "This isn't just about family, Sheriff," Jameson said, his voice low, almost as if he were confessing something. "This is about survival. It's about who you're willing to protect." The words hit Clark like a tidal wave. In that moment, everything began to fall into place. The lies, the missing pieces, the threats, all of it was a part of a much larger, darker game. And now, he had a choice to make. Keep digging and uncover the truth, or let it all go, protecting himself and everyone else from the destruction that was sure to follow. But there was something else. Something in Jameson's eyes made Clark wonder if he had already made that choice long ago. It was then that the full weight of the situation sank in. There was no escape from this. No easy answers. Only dangerous decisions. And Clark realized with growing horror that, no matter what path he chose, he might never see the truth without paying the ultimate price. The air around Clark felt charged, suffocating, as the truth he had been inching toward finally began to come into focus. But with each new revelation, it became clearer that this wasn't just a story of missing brothers, old photographs, and forgotten boats. This was something far larger, far darker than anything he could have ever imagined. As the tension mounted and the stakes reached their peak, Clark could feel the walls closing in, the danger lurking just beyond his reach. The clock was ticking, and every decision, every word spoken, carried the weight of lives hanging in the balance. Jameson's cold words echoed in Clark's mind. "This is about survival. It's about who you're willing to protect." But Clark wasn't sure anymore who the real enemies were, or if he could even trust anyone. Everything had blurred, friends, allies, enemies, all tangled together in a web of lies and betrayal. The revelation of the boat had sent shockwaves through him, but it was Jameson's cryptic warning, his words about protection, that gnawed at Clark's mind. Jameson had been playing a game the entire time, and now, Clark was realizing he had been nothing more than a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous operation. As Clark stood there by the riverbank, his thoughts racing, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. The figure emerged from the shadows, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw who it was. Eliza. But there was something wrong in the way she moved, a subtle hesitation in her steps. She was no longer the confident woman who had guided him through the investigation. Now, she seemed fragile, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by someone else. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "Eliza," Clark said, his voice tight, his instinct screaming at him. "What's going on? What are you not telling me?" She hesitated for a moment, her gaze darting to the shadows where Jameson stood, then back at Clark. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but it's not just about your brother or the twins. There's a bigger story here. One that involves more people than you can imagine." Clark's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean? Who else is involved?" Her face contorted in anguish, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse. But then, with a deep breath, she steadied herself, her voice trembling as she spoke the words that would shatter everything Clark thought he knew. "Jameson isn't the only one who's been playing you. I've been working with him. All along." The confession hit Clark like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. His mind raced to make sense of it, but everything seemed to twist, to fall apart.
How could she?
How could Eliza, the one person he had trusted the most in this tangled mess, be working against him? The betrayal was too much to process, but as the pieces slowly clicked into place, Clark knew deep down that he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. It was all connected. His brother's disappearance, the twins, the strange photographs, it all pointed to something far more sinister, something none of them could have anticipated. But Eliza wasn't the only one hiding secrets. From the shadows, another figure emerged, and Clark's heart nearly stopped again. It was Carla's father, Thomas. He had always seemed like the grieving, harmless man, but now, standing in front of him, Clark could see the coldness in his eyes, the mask of grief slipping to reveal something far more calculated. Thomas stepped forward, a wry smile creeping across his face. "You're too late, Clark," he said, his voice calm, as if he were speaking to an old friend. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." Clark's mind reeled as he looked at the three of them, their faces now twisted in a cruel mockery of friendship. It was a trap. It had been a trap from the very beginning. The photo, the boat, the missing twins, all of it was part of a far-reaching conspiracy that had been in motion long before Clark even realized he was involved. "You see, Sheriff," Thomas continued, his voice low and sinister, "you thought this was all about your brother, didn't you? But it's bigger than that. We've all been part of something much larger. A plan that's been set in motion for decades. And now, it's too late to turn back." Clark's pulse raced, his thoughts scattered, but in that moment, he knew that this was the climax he had been dreading. His life, the lives of the people he cared about, were at the mercy of a conspiracy he could barely comprehend. The full scale of it was only just beginning to unfold. The floodgates had opened, and Clark was standing on the edge of a revelation that would alter everything. Jameson stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "You were never meant to find out, Clark. We tried to keep you in the dark, but now that you know, there's no going back." The urgency in his voice was undeniable. As he spoke, Clark realized the gravity of the situation. Every move he had made, every decision, had been carefully orchestrated to lead him to this moment. The people he had trusted, the people he had relied on, were all part of this dark puzzle that had been designed to keep him in the dark. He was a mere player in a game far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And now, as the walls of the conspiracy closed in around him, he had no choice but to face the truth. But as he stood there, a sense of dread washed over him. The conspiracy was bigger than he had ever thought possible. The people involved weren't just local figures, they were connected to forces that stretched far beyond his small town. Powerful people. Dangerous people. And Clark had unwittingly walked into a storm that he couldn't control, one that was poised to consume everything he loved. "You don't have to do this," Eliza pleaded, her voice shaking, but there was a sense of desperation in her tone that made Clark's skin crawl. "It doesn't have to go this far." But the truth was clear now. It had already gone too far. The stakes were higher than ever, and there was no escaping the darkness that had swallowed him whole. As the realization sank in, Clark knew that his next move could mean the difference between life and death. He could no longer trust anyone, and he couldn't afford to hesitate. The conspiracy was out in the open now, and the only thing standing between him and whatever lay ahead was the razor-thin line of his own choices. And that was the hardest part. Clark had been a sheriff, a man of the law, someone who believed in justice. But now, as the conspiracy spread out like a dark web before him, Clark was forced to confront the truth that there was no justice in this world, not anymore. Only survival. Clark's heart raced as he stood at the edge of the river, the water dark and silent in front of him. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the scene, making the once familiar landscape feel foreign, hostile. Behind him, Jameson and Thomas were closing in, their footsteps heavy, deliberate, their eyes cold with the certainty of control. They had orchestrated this whole twisted game, manipulating him into this final confrontation. But there was something else now, something new in Clark's chest, an undeniable need to finish it, to uncover the truth no matter what it cost. Because if he didn't, everything would be lost. His brother's disappearance, the missing twins, the shattered lives, it all hinged on what would happen next. Eliza's words echoed in his mind, a fragile whisper in the chaos. It doesn't have to go this far. But Clark knew better. They had all pushed it too far. He was already too deep, and the path behind him had long since vanished. He was past the point of turning back. The conspiracy wasn't just some small-town mystery. It was something far more dangerous, a vast network of corruption and betrayal that spanned far beyond what he had ever imagined. And now it had all come to a head. "Clark," Jameson's voice cut through the still night, smooth and confident. "You've come so far, but this is where it ends. There's nothing left for you here but regret."
Clark didn't respond.
His eyes were locked on the water, the boat still partially submerged, its once vibrant paint now faded and peeling. It was a haunting sight, the final piece of the puzzle. It had been here all along, hidden beneath the surface, just like the truth. His brother and the twins, all lost to the currents, forgotten by everyone except those who had orchestrated their disappearances. But now, the boat was here, and so was he, on the precipice of unraveling everything. His hand clenched around the flashlight, its beam flickering in the darkness. He wasn't backing down. The night air seemed to thicken with tension, every breath Clark took feeling heavier than the last. Suddenly, a noise to his left made him spin around. It was Eliza, her face pale, her body trembling, eyes wide with panic. She didn't move closer, but her gaze darted nervously between Clark and the two men approaching from behind. "Get away from him, Eliza." Thomas's voice was commanding, filled with the venom of someone used to getting their way. "You've made your choice." But Eliza didn't respond. She stood still, her face betraying the struggle inside her. It was clear, she was trapped, torn between loyalty and survival, but more than that, between what was right and what was easy. The weight of her betrayal sat heavily between them, and for the first time, Clark saw the cracks in her cold exterior. She wasn't as powerful as she had seemed. She was a pawn, just like him, just like everyone else. "You knew," Clark finally said, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "You knew about the boat. You knew about my brother. And you let me keep chasing ghosts." Her eyes filled with regret, but it was too late. "I never wanted you to find out," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But it's too late now, Clark. You're not going to stop them. You're not going to stop any of this." His grip on the flashlight tightened. "I'm not afraid of you, Eliza. I'm not afraid of any of you." Before she could answer, Jameson's voice rang out, cutting through the air with the finality of a death sentence. "Enough, Clark. You think this is about you? You're nothing more than an obstacle we've had to deal with. You've been chasing shadows your whole life. But the truth is, this isn't your story anymore. It never was." The words stung, but they didn't break Clark's resolve. He wasn't just dealing with a conspiracy anymore. It was personal. They had taken his brother, they had taken so much from him, and now he would take it all back. With a sudden movement, he flicked the flashlight's beam across the riverbank, illuminating a small, weathered box partially buried in the sand. His heart skipped a beat. The box. He had seen it in a photograph, a clue he had missed until now. This was it. The final piece. His breath caught in his throat as he lunged for the box, hands shaking as he pulled it free. He didn't care about the threats or the danger anymore. It was all or nothing. Inside the box, he found several faded photographs, old newspaper clippings, and a set of documents that revealed a network of individuals, including Jameson and Thomas, involved in a massive cover-up. But there was something else.
A name.
His brother's name. And beneath it, in bold, red letters, "Final warning. Remove all traces before the river dries." Clark's pulse pounded in his ears as the full impact of the discovery hit him like a freight train. It wasn't just about the boat, or the missing twins, or even the conspiracy. It was about control. They had been controlling the town, pulling the strings behind the scenes for years. They had buried secrets so deep that even Clark's investigation couldn't get close. But now it was out in the open. And no one, not even Jameson or Thomas, could stop him from exposing the truth. But as the weight of the discovery settled in, everything shifted in an instant. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble, and a shadow fell over him. Without warning, Clark felt a sharp pain in his chest, a burning pressure that stole the breath from his lungs. His body went rigid, and for a moment everything spun. He looked down to see blood soaking through his shirt, thick, red, and fast. He staggered back, his vision blurring as he realized what had happened. Jameson's eyes gleamed in the moonlight, a satisfied smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You should have known, Clark. You were never meant to win this game." The world seemed to slow around him, and for the briefest moment, everything felt surreal. The boat, the photos, his brother's disappearance, the betrayal. It all crashed together in a flood of realization. He had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? The conspiracy was far more intricate, far darker than he had ever imagined. And now it was too late. As Clark's vision began to fade, his thoughts swirled, a final question lingering in his mind. Was he the only one who had been played? Or was the entire town, his entire life, just another piece in a much larger, much darker game? Everything had led to this. And the truth, the final twist, was still out of reach. Clark woke up in a sterile hospital room, the blinding white walls surrounding him like a fortress. His chest ached, each breath pulling at his skin with the kind of pain that made him remember every second of the last few days, the boat, the revelations, and the final confrontation with Jameson. He had barely made it out alive. The wound in his side throbbed, but the pain was nothing compared to the weight of the truth he had uncovered. He had thought the fight was over, but as his eyes fluttered open, reality hit him like a freight train. It wasn't over.
Not yet.
The doctors had patched him up, but his mind was still reeling from the storm of emotions that had taken over him since the moment he set foot in the river. He had uncovered everything, the names, the connections, the corrupt system that had been running things from the shadows for years. But it hadn't been enough. Not enough to stop them. He couldn't shake the thought that something was still out there, something he hadn't quite pieced together. And there was one question that haunted him above all others. Why had they let him get this far? His phone buzzed on the bedside table, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Eliza. Her words were simple, yet heavy with meaning. "They know. You were right. You were always right." It was a confession of sorts, a reluctant acknowledgement of the dark truth that had driven her to betray him. Clark wanted to respond, wanted to yell, to demand answers, but he knew better. Eliza was trapped in her own web of lies, just like him. She had made choices, just as he had, and now they both had to live with the consequences. For the first time in days, Clark allowed himself to breathe deeply. He wasn't going to waste his energy on people like her anymore. He had a bigger fight ahead. The police had arrested Jameson and Thomas, but Clark knew that the conspiracy went much deeper than they had ever let on. The documents he had found, the connections he had uncovered, they were just the tip of the iceberg. The real story was much larger, more intricate, and far more dangerous than anyone had ever realized. But now, it was in the hands of the authorities. They were the ones who had to finish what Clark had started. He could only hope they had the strength, the resources, and the courage to carry on the fight he had started. Still, there was a part of him that couldn't quite shake the feeling that he hadn't fully won. The mystery wasn't over. Not completely. There was more to the river, to the boat, and to the disappearance of his brother than he had uncovered. The police were combing through the new evidence, piecing together the story, but Clark knew that, deep down, they might never uncover everything. And maybe, just maybe, that was the way it had to be. Some mysteries, some secrets, were too dangerous to be fully exposed. As the days went on, Clark returned to the town, now scarred but determined. He stood by the river once more, staring at the same water that had taken so much from him. The boat was gone, and with it, the last tangible piece of his past. But something had changed inside him. He wasn't looking for answers anymore. He had found enough to understand the world he lived in, to understand how deep the lies ran, but more importantly, He had found his own truth. The loss of his brother, the years of unanswered questions, the decades of searching, it had all led him here. He could never undo the past, but he could walk forward. And for the first time in a long time, he could feel peace. But as he stood there, staring at the river that had swallowed so many lives, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. It was brief. "You think it's over? Think again. The real game is just beginning." Clark's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening as the weight of the words sank in.
He had been right.
The fight wasn't over. And as much as he wanted to find peace, to leave the mystery behind, he knew now that he was inescapably tied to the darkness that had consumed the town, his family, and his life. Maybe there was no escaping it. But maybe, just maybe, that was the price of uncovering the truth. The final twist hung in the air, lingering like a ghost. The story was over, but the mystery, that mystery, would never truly be solved. Not by anyone, not ever. As Clark looked out over the river, he realized that some truths weren't meant to be uncovered. And sometimes, the hardest thing in the world wasn't finding the answers, it was letting go of the questions. He turned away, the weight of everything still heavy on his shoulders. But he was walking forward, into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. And as the camera zoomed out, the audience was left to wonder what had really happened, and who was pulling the strings behind it all. The answers might never come, but the story would linger, forever unfinished.